Hello, this is Phyllis for another episode of Second Wind. Just to give you another update, besides the work for community and education, this one's titled, It's All About the Business, where we used to say, mind, MYOB, mind your own business. So I'm just sharing a little bit of what I've been involved with as far as these business opportunities and COVID recovery. I have a little additional sound to sort of set the mood, keeping very busy. And I want to focus again on what has been going on. We had a gathering about a week or so ago of the National Association of Black Accountants, and I was very thankful and lucky to attend. There was a huge turnout. Major corporations were there, and I had an opportunity to network. There are so many opportunities out there, just finding the right fit. And the major sponsors included Amazon, Boeing, Wells Fargo. There were over 100, as well as job hunting and career opportunities. So it's about giving back, but also getting and giving part of your business opportunities and skills that I'm looking into now. So we just had 4th of July, and again, a lot of things happening, having some ambivalent feelings, but I want to talk about 4th of July. We had a lot of fireworks. A lot of people are up and out and about. The COVID pandemic is here, so that's why I'm just showing this image of the fireworks that I looked at. We had tons of traffic, about 3 to 4 million people out on the highways. That's why I've got this image. I have this image going just as a reminder for those of you that are still stuck in traffic. I hope my sound is okay. I think we've made an upgrade on that, so it shouldn't be an issue like it has been in the past. But we had a lot of traffic, but what I did, I had an opportunity to think about, well, what is 4th of July to me? I saw a lot of postings about Frederick Douglass. What is 4th of July to some of us that come from the slave experience, the slave background? Even though it's 2021, we have 400-year legacy. So I spend part of my time listening to 400 Souls, which is a history of the African American experience from 1619 to 2019. It was a good listen, a good reminder that even though we have tons of things to appreciate and to be thankful for, there's still much more work that needs to be done. And I want to show you that it's very possible to have this information at your fingertips. For example, with the 400 Souls, you have a chance to listen to 90 authors. And since my sound is going strong, I'm going to...
One of the reasons for the British success
listen to this.
Is that they also used African American guides and laborers.
By Dana Ramey.
Camino Dali was one African American who helped the British capture Savannah by bringing troops through a swamp area behind the city. At the end of the war, nearly 4,000 people of African descent left Savannah and headed to Florida, the Caribbean, and Canada. But many Black people remained. Today, African Americans represent 54% of the population.
This is 1779
the First African Baptist Church still stands,
to 1784.
And the battle sites of the American Revolution are recognized in city parks, on historical landmarks, and through the oral traditions of Africans and their descendants.
And I want to give credit to Ibram X.
The freedom dreams
Kendi,
of the Revolutionary War
Keisha N.
remain
Blaine.
the freedom dreams of today.
Yes.
1784 to 1789. The U.S. Constitution.
This is critical.
Donna, Brazil.
What the 4th is about.
My name is Richard Allen. I was born enslaved and died a Methodist bishop. I am an African and an American. In my lifetime, 1760 to 1831, I had 2 enslavers. Both were relatively good men by my own standards and those of my fellow citizens. Still, slavery was a bitter pill to swallow. My emotions never accepted that my mind, my learning, my labor, my character, my hands were someone's personal property. Beginning with the first awareness of my condition, I thought without rest of freedom. I often felt that one day I would be free. Benjamin Chew of Philadelphia was my first owner. When I was 8, he sold my parents, my siblings, and me to a Delaware planter of modest means. Stokely Sturgis and his wife were aging, kind people. They didn't work me very hard. In fact, I didn't know hard work until I left them to earn back my body. When I was 10, the Boston Massacre took place.
Let's pause. Again, this is about past, present, and future, looking back and looking at today on what it really felt like 4th of July and feels like. Let's continue. Again, this is a phenomenal work, 400 years, broken up into 5-year periods, and I think this is significant, the period of 1784 to 1789 about the Constitution. So we'll continue.
All people, both enslaved and free, were living and moving and breathing in an ether of expectation. It hit me hard that Crispus Attucks, a man like me, was the first to give his life. In 1776, we learned the news that the Declaration of Independence was signed and issued. Its message had a deep impact. The following year, at age 17, I became severely aware of my personal deficiencies, my moral shortcomings. They weighed heavily. I struggled daily with these feelings. Then Freeborn Garretson, a white preacher, came. I listened and converted to Methodism. I was hungry for spiritual discipline and guidance. I took scripture to heart, especially the teachings of Christ. They were words to live by, and I lived by them. My life changed. Then Sturgis's life changed. He had been attending our meetings when at one of them, Reverend Garretson said that slave owners had been weighed in the balance and found wanting. That struck Sturgis squarely in the heart. He saw he could no longer own slaves. Sturgis told me I should leave, find work, and pay him what he had paid for me. By age 26, in 1786, I had bought my body, literally earned my freedom. It was in some ways harder to be a free man. Now, no mistake, the ideals of the American Revolution, the words of the Declaration, had triggered the fall of slavery in the northern states. Although unable to endure the hypocrisy of slavery, most northern white citizens could not bring themselves to be social equals. Accordingly, they did all they could to squelch opportunity for free American Africans. I felt for those newly freed. Few whites would make loans to buy homes. Those who did, mostly abolitionist Quakers, were tight in reviewing and granting them. It was hard to get jobs. It was hard just to live. We even found it hard to be dead. We were not allowed to own cemeteries in which to bury our deceased. This conflict, dealing with the hypocrisy of slavery while building a foundation of all men are created equal, was an ongoing contest throughout the country. It became the primary discord at the Constitutional Convention. A nation without a national government is, in my view, an awful spectacle, wrote Alexander Hamilton. If the United States were to survive as a nation, it would need a central government. That reality, that overriding necessity, drove the convention's compromises with slavery. Because of my faith, I was less judgmental and more forgiving than were many about this hypocrisy. We were instructed to do good to those who hated and despitefully misused us. Those weren't just words. They were a command. I obeyed. With other American Africans, I had been attending services at St. George's in Philadelphia. One Sunday, an elder was standing at the door and told us to go to the gallery. We took seats in the same location as where we used to sit, downstairs. No sooner had we touched our seats than a prayer was announced, so we got on our knees. I was focused on the prayer when I heard a commotion of tussling and angry low voices. I looked up to see a trustee pulling my friend and colleague, Absalom Jones, off his knees, saying, "You must not kneel here." Jones said he would get up when prayer was finished. The trustee would not have that. Jones was told to rise immediately or he would be forced to rise. The prayer ended just then. We rose as one and left as one, never to return to St. George's. The abuse and affront were the harder to bear since we had contributed largely of our monies and given our labor generously to laying the church floor and building the gallery. We were shut out of St. George's by 1787. The Constitutional Convention was in town. There, too, we were shut out. The most vigorous debates were over allowing slavery without building it into our new institutions. I read the U.S. Constitution. Nowhere are the words slave or slavery to be found. Abraham Lincoln later told a Cooper Union audience that this mode of alluding to slaves and slavery, instead of speaking of them, was employed on purpose to exclude from the Constitution the idea that there could be property in man. It is an honest and realistic argument that slavery became incorporated into the Constitution without naming it because slavery was considered on its way to extinction. To many, the Constitutional Convention compromises were but a temporary accommodation. Some see only the hypocrisy. They admit of no decent impulses at all in the Convention's compromises, and refuse to tolerate slavery's existence for a while longer as a necessity, with the intent that it should in time be no more. But named or not, slavery was there in writing, a presence allowed by the Constitution. As for myself, I had been owned by good men who wouldn't be able to see their own sin for years. But I knew of my own sins, and I have a Lord who commands me to forgive.
I'm going to pause here because this is very significant history, not taught in the schools when I was a youth, and it's print, actual work by scholars, history for 400 years in 5-year bits by approximately 90 scholars organized by Dr. Ibrahim X. Kendi and Keisha N. Blaine. So again, I've mentioned I've worked on my PhD and published over 80 books, so my work is in alignment and consistent with the work by Dr. Kendi and Dr. Keisha Blaine. So I want to scroll forward. We have the time period when the U.S. was established, 1776. We have 1784, 1789. But there are some other very interesting tidbits I want to share before I go back to the PowerPoint. This one in particular is about Sally Hemings because I've reviewed the play Hamilton, listened several times before actually watching it, because that's not in my budget. I understand the tickets were up to $10,000 per ticket. Definitely not in my budget, and I think it's coming back to town. But again, this segment about Sally Hemings is very interesting and very relevant because she's mentioned briefly in the play, and her association with Jefferson. One scene is striking where he says, "Sally, hand me this letter. Let me give you this letter. I want you to read this to me." And she opens up, gaps open her legs, and swivels her hips while reading the letter. So I'm taking up and taking in all the visual cues as well as the words and the images portrayed in this play. I'll discuss later, but I want to share this about Sally Hemings, 1789 to
1794. Sally Hemings. Annette Gordon Reed. In August 1789, Sally Hemings was living at the Hôtel de Langeac on the Rue de Paris, just off the Champs-Élysées in Paris. She had arrived about 2 years earlier after living in London for 2 weeks at the home of John and Abigail Adams. Hemings had accompanied Mary, Polly, Jefferson, the 9-year-old daughter of Thomas Jefferson, on an Atlantic voyage from Virginia that lasted 5 weeks. Jefferson was in Paris, serving as the American minister to France. John Adams was the American minister in London. He and his wife had agreed to receive Jefferson's daughter and her traveling companion, and to keep Polly until her father could arrive and bring her to Paris. Jefferson had asked for a careful Negro woman to accompany Polly. Then the woman was to return to Virginia. He had suggested Isabel Hearn, who was about 28 years old. Hearn was unable to make the trip, having recently given birth. So Jefferson's in-laws, Francis and Elizabeth Epps, with whom Polly and Sally were staying, sent 14-year-old Sally Hemings instead. In the convoluted world of Virginia slavery and family, Sally Hemings's father was John Wales, the father of Jefferson's deceased wife, Martha, and also of Elizabeth Epps. So the little girl whom Hemings helped bring across the ocean was her half-niece. When she arrived in Paris, Hemings joined her brother James, who had been in the city since 1784, having come over with Jefferson and Jefferson's eldest daughter, Martha, Patsy. A great deal had taken place during Hemings's stay in Paris, both within the Hôtel de Langeac and outside it. France had witnessed the fall of the Bastille in July 1789, which is often seen as the beginning of the French Revolution. In truth, much had been happening on that front since Hemings's arrival. The signs of discord in the society were everywhere. Demonstrators amassed in the neighborhood where Hemings lived, outside her residence, actually, shouting about the new world that was to come. Paris was on fire with talk of politics among men and women of all classes. Hemings's neighborhood was a relatively new one, and though the overall number of black people in Paris was small, the section of Paris where the Hôtel de Langeac was located had the city's largest concentration of people of color. It was an active community, whose members kept tabs on one another's fortunes, alerting each other to developments that were taking place in their community. Perhaps people kept tabs on the fate of Sally Hemings. As her son Madison Hemings explained, during her time in Paris, she had become Mr. Jefferson's concubine. It is not known when this occurred, but the evidence indicates that it was near the end of her time in the city. In fact, it is very likely that by August 1789, 16-year-old Hemings was either newly pregnant or about to become pregnant. Jefferson had been planning a leave of absence to return his daughters and most likely Hemings to Virginia. He was set to come back to Paris and finish his time as minister. When Hemings learned of Jefferson's plans, she balked. She was not alone. None of the young people who were living at the hotel, Jefferson's daughters and his protege, William Short, who had come from Virginia to be Jefferson's secretary, wanted to leave. James Hemings could expect to return with Jefferson. The Hemings siblings knew that the law in France gave them an easy shot at freedom. Jefferson knew this too and was defensive about it, which is probably why he paid both Hemings siblings wages, and paid them well. James was the chef de cuisine at the Hôtel de Langeac, and Sally was lady's maid to Jefferson's daughters and, likely, Jefferson's chambermaid. It was a heady time for both brother and sister. They were nominally free, receiving wages near the top of the scale for French servants, and living in the midst of a revolution that promised a new world for people on the bottom of the social scale. Hemings had her own money, but Jefferson had started buying her clothing, and there was reason to think she was attending balls with Patsy Jefferson as an attendant. Both Hemmings siblings would have had every reason to think they had a chance to make it in the new society being born. James hired a tutor to teach him proper French. It is not known whether Sally was included, though her son mentioned her facility with the language. Most important, Sally Hemings did not want to be enslaved again. Jefferson wanted to bring her back to Virginia, and when he met with her resistance, he promised her that if she came home with him, she would live a life of privilege, and that any children they had would be free upon reaching the age of 21. Madison Hemings said that his mother implicitly relied on Jefferson's promises and decided to return to Virginia. Hemings, her brother James, and the Jeffersons set sail for the United States in October 1789. They landed in Norfolk, Virginia in November. After visiting relatives, the group arrived at Monticello just before Christmas. The next reference to Sally Hemings in Jefferson's records is a letter written around September 1790, saying that at some point in the spring she had been too ill to make a trip. Other letters from that time make clear that Hemings's status had changed. She ceased to be a lady's maid for Jefferson's daughters once they returned to the United States. It is not known when Hemings gave birth, but the child she had upon her return to Virginia apparently did not survive infancy. As things turned out, Jefferson did not return to Paris. He accepted President Washington's invitation to serve as U.S. Secretary of State and left for New York, then the nation's capital, in March 1790.
Okay, let's pause here because in the play Hamilton that I'm still in the process of dissecting and reviewing on Disney Plus, as well as the audio, it shows a grand entrance by Jefferson, played by an African American with very royal and sort of superstar airs. And I guess that arrogance is attributed to his diplomatic activities in France and other things going on. So it's interesting how the history is woven together and presented from different perspectives. So this is how I spent part of my 4th of July. I won't continue this, but I want to share one other item because Alexander Hamilton, I understand, founded the bank as one of his major accomplishments. And I believe he was a part of the Treasury. But at 1794, 4 years later, I want to share briefly this bit of history that was in my lens as the 4th of July was celebrated.
1794 to 1799. The Fugitive Slave Act. Deirdre Cooper Owens. In 1788, a new Western nation established itself as a fledgling republic that privileged the democratic process for its most respected citizens, white male property owners over 21 years old. At the cornerstone of its democratic process was the vote. Overwhelmingly, white male voters created clauses in the U.S. Constitution that attended to slavery, one of the new nation's most pressing political issues. Article 4, Section 2, Clause 3 of the Constitution not only protected slavery as an American institution, but also protected slave owners whose human property liberated themselves into either free states or territories. In 1789, voters elected their first president, the former general and Revolutionary War hero George Washington. He was one of the wealthiest and most politically connected slave owners in the United States, whose presence eventually established the presidency as a position that was amenable to men who made up what would later be known as the slavocracy, the slave-owning ruling class that ran the country. It comes as no surprise that from 1789, when Washington was elected, until 1877, when General Ulysses Grant ended his presidency under Reconstruction, more American presidents, 12, owned slaves than those who did not. 6. As a result of the seemingly enduring and lucrative industry based on human bondage, the United States gave birth to a small but politically mighty abolitionist movement. During the early 1790s, powerful slave owners put more teeth into Article 4 of the Constitution to protect their assets, enslaved people. In 1793, Congress passed the Fugitive Slave Act, which deemed it a federal crime to aid any fugitive from slavery. And be it further enacted that any person who shall knowingly and willingly obstruct or hinder such claimant, his agent, or attorney, in so seizing or arresting such fugitive from labor, or shall rescue such fugitive from such claimant, his agent or attorney, when so arrested pursuant to the authority herein given and declared, or shall harbor or conceal such person after notice that he or she was a fugitive from labor, as aforesaid, shall, for either of the said offenses, forfeit and pay the sum of $500, which penalty may be recovered by and for the benefit of such claimant by action of debt in any court proper to try the same.
Let's pause here and continue with the presentation, sharing how I spent part of my 4th of July. But there's an interesting bit of information where this was part of the law, along with the health consequences and medical research that was going on slaves that indicated a false theory that it was the slaves' illness to try to run away from slavery. They came up with a name for it, and that slavery was, quote, good for their health. So we won't go further into this, but there's a mental health as well as physical health, as well as legal issues that I considered and that need to be considered in reviewing our current celebrations. So again, I highly recommend, I want to endorse and praise the work of Dr. Ibram X. Kendi, editor, Keisha Blaine, editor, and you can continue listening on your own. And I'll move forward with this presentation. We may have to put this into 2 parts, but one of the other things I looked at as far as doing further research was the story I uncovered. A celebration at the National Archives reminded me that Edward Ned Hector was part of the Continental Army, and I discovered several presentations about his work. And since my audio is working, I'll share a bit of this. Again, not in my history studies.
Here I am. I thought it would be an interesting indulgence and nostalgia to don the old uniform again and come out and visit where I fought at. Who am I? Oh, forgive me. My name is Edward Hector. I'm one of the many black soldiers that fight in the American Revolution. I'm with Proctor's 3rd Pennsylvania Artillery. I fought both in this battle and the Battle of Germantown as well.
1777.
I am both a teamster and I am an artillerist, a bombardier to be precise. I hauling ammunition in my wagon. I'm also helping to load and fire the cannons. We were located near the Brandywine on a hill that overlooked it, placed right next to Mr. Chad's house. Our spies had learned information that Rickles had landed at a place called the Head of Elk down in Maryland.
Right. We'll pause here. You can visit those sites if you're in the Washington, D.C. area, or visit the National Archives. You can also continue reviewing these files that are on YouTube along with my presentation. But again, this is part of what I did with my 4th of July, continuing my research as far as the American history that was not taught to us. So There's one more bit of information I want to share, and this is a presentation about another spy that's interesting enough that is mentioned in Hamilton. This is all leading to a little bit of additional commentary about Hamilton because we're looking back, but we're also looking at the present looking back, and it shows how you have different perspectives. If one were to listen to Hamilton first, which I did, I didn't have a clue. All I knew is a few Lynn, the creator of the play, and several characters, but I didn't realize what a beautiful array of people. This is another important segment about the spy.
But it's sometimes been left out about the role African Americans played during the Revolutionary War. Well, one man, James Armistead Lafayette, born in New Kent County, risked his life while enslaved to help bring the American forces information they needed for independence. On the banks of the York River stands a monument marking the place where America secured her freedom during the Revolutionary War. We know all about Washington, the Marquis de Lafayette, Rochambeau, the heroes written down in history. But there is one man who helped make this all possible.
His contributions to winning the war are.
And this is his picture, one of his portraits.
James Armistead Lafayette, portrayed by Stephen Seals at Colonial Williamsburg.
Through being owned by William Armistead, he ends up meeting the Marquis de Lafayette. Somehow they bond, and somehow the agreement is made between them that James is going to make his way to the British lines and act like he's a fake runaway, and that he's going to share British information with the Marquis de Lafayette and the American forces.
Okay, this is an interesting story, a commentary. You can look at the rest on YouTube. I've made several visits to Williamsburg when I lived in that area, and it's fascinating to see the changes, the more reality depicted now at Williamsburg, giving more participation to the people that were there. So these are some thoughts to think about. We get to Hamilton, the play. I recall the uproar. It's available, the music. I listened to the audio. I didn't buy tickets, and I'm glad I didn't because now I've had a chance to sit back and ponder. But one of the thoughts after listening to a few of the songs about his origins in the Caribbean, one of my first thoughts was, well, he might have been black. There's a lot of things going on, a lot of people that were and still are black or don't identify, and they don't necessarily visually appear to be black. And I found research that states the following. He was the illegitimate son of Rachel Fawcett Lavienne on the Caribbean island, the size of a town of Kirkland called Nevis. Now, if you listen to the words in the play Hamilton, they start out by calling him those words. They didn't say too much about his origins, but as I think about it, on the Caribbean in particular, as well as in many cases, race was not identified on birth records. Reading this commentary, this was additional research. His mother was divorced for, quote, infidelity long before Hamilton was born, casting question on his father. Some claim it was James Hamilton, the man who lived with his mother. Others claim it was Nicholas Kruger, a Caribbean merchant with connections to New York, who employed an 11-year-old Alexander Hamilton after his alleged father left him and his mother died. Now, they do mention that he worked for some man in his warehouse and then went to New York after they collected money, but there's no reference to the possibility of him being black. And in this country, one drop of black blood makes you black African American colored. So that's something to think about as you watch the play. You can watch it on Disney, you can watch it on YouTube, and that brings to mind a few other things, because if this is true, there's no mention of DNA tests. Some claims that Hamilton's mother had an affair with slaves. Who knows? That's one unanswered question, but in my experience and seeing different people and in seeing the characters in this play, it really raises the question that it's possible he was black. He was shot by Aaron Burr after being engaged in a duel. They were constant rivals. They said they were lawyers and neighbors in their law practice. But what is not mentioned, Aaron Burr shot Alexander Hamilton. Many others witnessed him. Then he escaped, but he was never prosecuted for the murder. So again, that really raises my curiosity that perhaps Alexander Hamilton was black. It may not have been disclosed, but according to this research, they did refer to one of the founding members of that organization, referred to him as a Creole, you know what. So anyway, that's some things where we have differences in background, social differences, differences in color and complexion, as well as appearance. In many cases, it's given people opportunities not available to others. And if you look at the imagery of that play, that gives you some other things to think about. And as a scholar and PhD on the way, I have more questions that I'll just address on my own, but the play raises questions about values, how this man who had that appearance that was probably one of the reasons why he left the islands, if they knew his origins and his background, to start a new life in the United States, field his way, create a legacy. His son was killed. That was discussed in the play. Then he was shot, they say, in the same place. His son was murdered, and they were both veterans of the war to help found this country. And Alexander Hamilton, his name and ideas came up as I met with the bank current staff that's he founded back in New York years ago. So we have evidence to piece together the story. So I'll continue. It's full of question marks. They continue bubbling up. And what I want to do, I think, is cut this for now and we'll get to the present. So we'll end this for now. We'll take a brief break and we'll get back to a few of the musical interludes to think about as you watch Hamilton. Think about what questions you have. Maybe it's something you didn't think about. In our country's history. And this song, I want to give credit to Erykah Badu. This is the instrumental of her song, On and On. And it's all about education.